Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon have both been counting time to the end of the 2024 F1 season, both desperately awaiting fresh starts with new teams in 2025. And what started as a mildly concerning dip in performance for both drivers as the clock ticked down has become a dramatic implosion, with Ocon forced out of Alpine with one race still to go, and Lewis never give up Hamilton wanting to park his Mercedes well before the finish of the Qatar Grand Prix. We'll start with Ocon because his situation has taken the most dramatic and unexpected turn. He's been especially unhappy since Alpine introduced a powerful upgrade, first on Pierre Gasly's car for October's US Grand Prix in Austin. Ocon feels he's been missing between half a second and 7/10 to Gasly since then, even though Ocon's own car has run in the same specification since Mexico, save for the shorter nose and front wing fitted to Gasly's car for Qatar. Ocon's complaints sound like the classic under-rotation, whereby a driver is contained by a lack of confidence on corner entry, arrives at a corner too conservatively with too much steering lock applied, and therefore picks up wheel spin from too much of that steering lock still being applied as they try to exit the turn. But Ocon has remained adamant his driving is fine. He's never outright said Alpine has been deliberately holding him back, but has repeatedly suggested the car is to blame for the discrepancy with Gasly and said the team cannot trace the problem. We asked Ocon in Las Vegas if he felt he was getting fair treatment from Alpine, and his cryptic reply was, "I hope so." The shade Ocon has been throwing around, openly questioning his treatment by Alpine, has not gone down well with the team, which feels Ocon has not been properly exploiting the car in the way Gasly has. An awful Qatar Grand Prix in which Ocon exited in Q1 and was almost 9/10 slower than Gasly before crashing out at turn 1 in the race looks like a suitably miserable full stop on this fractured relationship, which, in fairness, has looked broken pretty much since Ocon clattered into Gasly in Monaco and effectively ended his own chances of having his contract renewed. Starting last on the grid, Ocon was always in for a tough race as Gasly fought for points and ended up finishing 5th, but Ocon didn't even make it through the first corner after locking up his front brakes and clattering into Nico Hülkenberg's Haas and Franco Colapinto's Williams. He headed to F1's media pen to perform his post-race duties while the Grand Prix was still happening, and his demeanour in those exchanges changed dramatically compared to 24 hours earlier, when he'd been doubling down again on his previous vague suggestions of being held back by a mysterious problem with his car. Now there was an air of saying a final farewell to the team he joined in 2020. He thanked the team for their hard work in 2024 and praised his engineers and mechanics for sticking together amid adversity before saying it's important to look ahead and see what we can prepare for the future. This appeared to be a reference to Ocon's planned end-of-season test with Haas in Abu Dhabi before he joins that team full-time in 2025. It seems that test was under threat if Ocon didn't agree to step down one race early and allow Alpine to run its rookie Jack Doohan, who will replace Ocon full-time at the start of next season. Alpine wants to get a head start on preparing Doohan while discarding a driver it clearly feels has become a disruptive influence, and, save for that excellent second place in the wet in Brazil, who is performing so poorly right now, he won't necessarily be helpful in the fight to secure 6th place in the Constructors' Championship. Unlike Hamilton, who is not being released to test with his new team Ferrari in 2024 due to commercial considerations, Ocon did receive a green light to drive for Haas in F1's Abu Dhabi tyre test. But Alpine, which has him under contract, is still free to bar him from that participation if it chooses to, and we understand it made use of that fact to ensure it gets Doohan into the race seat early. Ocon is still managed by Mercedes, whose boss Toto Wolff stopped short of admitting that missing Abu Dhabi was a done deal, but confirmed talks had taken place with Alpine and alluded to the Haas test being a key element in agreement being struck with Alpine to release Ocon early. And it would also mean Ocon is fully released from Alpine immediately, meaning Haas can do more with him to prepare for 2025 than just the Abu Dhabi test. And the same is true for Alpine with Doohan, who has completed a handful of tests and free practice sessions already, but has yet to be evaluated under the pressure of a full Grand Prix weekend. While Wolff deals with the fallout from Ocon's dramatic early Alpine exit, he's also having to contend with what has turned into a miserable Mercedes farewell for Hamilton. Hamilton has cut an increasingly dejected figure as the qualifying defeats to George Russell have mounted, and Lewis just hasn't been able to coherently explain. His mood hasn't been helped by the fact there's nothing much to fight for either, given Mercedes has been cut well adrift in the Constructors' Championship. Hamilton has only out-qualified Russell once in 9 races since F1's August break, and suffered his 5th defeat in a row in Qatar, where, rather like Daniel Ricciardo when he was getting regularly pasted by Lando Norris at McLaren, Lewis said he simply couldn't explain the gap to Russell. And during a disastrous race in which Hamilton jumped the start, slipped out of the points and briefly fell back to last place on the road, Hamilton actually did something unthinkable for a driver who is famed for telling people never to give up. He told his race engineer Peter Bonington that he wanted to retire a healthy car. When told he had a drive-through penalty for speeding in the pits, Hamilton replied, "Retire the car," and was told negative by Bonington. Hamilton then said, "No, I'm switching off when I get there, mate." But Hamilton ultimately abandoned that idea after being told he would have to carry a 5-second penalty into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix if he carried out his threat. Wolff explained that the unbearable understeer both Mercedes drivers were suffering with in the race, on top of all the problems Lewis specifically had experienced, meant it almost didn't make any sense to continue. But we're certain he wasn't referring to the final month of Hamilton's contract there, just the race itself. Wolff was also asked directly about conspiracy theories that have abounded this season as Hamilton has struggled, alleging Mercedes has been actively sabotaging Hamilton's car because he's leaving the team. Wolff called these comments nonsense and crazy, made-up conspiracy theories.
If you're looking for a Grand Prix that stands out even in F1's longest ever seasons, the Formula 1 Heineken Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort is the answer. From a unique seaside location and history to passionate packed crowds and off-track entertainment, the Dutch GP is much more than just an F1 race. Zandvoort has hosted some classics since 1952, and now of course it's the home of superstar Max Verstappen and his legion of orange-clad fans. But all supporters are welcome, and with McLaren's growing competitiveness, orange isn't always for Verstappen. The distinctive circuit layout sweeping through sand dunes is evident as soon as you walk in and makes it a spectacular place to watch F1 cars. Zandvoort's novel location is also conveniently within reach, as it's only 30 minutes from Schiphol Airport. The great city of Amsterdam turns 750 next year and is just a short journey from Zandvoort by train or bus. The canals, museums and lively atmosphere make it one of the most visited tourist destinations in Europe. There's not just the racing to look forward to either. Zandvoort has entertainment, culture and top international artists to bring the party. Superstar DJ Armin van Buuren headlined Super Friday last year, and 2025 promises to be even bigger. To register your interest in tickets for the 2025 Dutch GP, follow the link in the description.
But it's also true that Hamilton has, at times, fanned the flames of these conspiracies by vaguely suggesting there have been discrepancies between his and Russell's cars in 2024. He's never outright said he's not getting equal treatment, but as the qualifying defeats have mounted up, Hamilton's attempts to rationalise in the immediate aftermath have carried a certain air of slightly paranoid desperation. When you say one of the cars is working a lot better, as Hamilton did in Brazil, that's clearly a suggestion something on your car specifically is to blame for underperformance, and that something is not you. Having spent time at the end of last season wondering if he genuinely still had what it takes to perform at the highest level, Hamilton has clearly decided his driving is not the issue, even though the guy on the other side of the garage is somehow extracting more from what should be an identical car, within the bounds of normal setup preferences and variations. There's been a suggestion Hamilton is trying to force these reluctant, understeery ground effect cars to yield to his natural, ultra-dynamic driving style, where he dances on the edge of adhesion under braking and carries incredible corner entry momentum. These cars appear to be so inherently unstable that often it seems the better way is, as Fernando Alonso has said, to drive at 90%, because when you drive at the limit, everything falls apart. But driving at 90% is not really in Hamilton's makeup, especially when it's time to lay everything on the line in Q3. He's hardwired to go for pole. There's a suggestion too that he has sometimes got himself lost down a few setup rabbit holes this year, trying to chase something the car simply cannot give him. Perhaps Russell, who has always been a driver more preoccupied with through corner balance rather than specifically what's happening on corner entry, just naturally gels better with the way this generation of F1 cars likes to be driven. We know favouritism does happen in F1, particularly when teams are up against it, short of parts and maybe money too. Sometimes you simply have to pick a driver to back, and if that's not something preordained contractually, then there is always room for misunderstanding. When drivers start to feel their teammate is the one the team is gravitating towards, whether that be because of commercial commercial or performance considerations, or simply because one driver is staying and the other is leaving, it can often lead to tension. Sometimes it's true that the pattern of car development moves the performance window away from one driver's comfort zone. It could be that Alpine and Mercedes have both delivered upgrades that have naturally, and not even intentionally, better suited Gasly's and Russell's natural way of driving. And if there is a split in driver preference, of course it makes no sense to follow the guy who's about to depart your team. It can be mentally scrambling for a driver when performance ebbs away or disappears suddenly, and the sort of unfavourable circumstances Ocon shares with Hamilton, soon headed elsewhere and not particularly happy about the current situation, can create a sense of paranoia that is ultimately self-defeating. Ocon, at least, will get the release of it all being over sooner than he anticipated, but unfortunately for Hamilton, the show must go on at least a little longer.